Let's start with a fact that breaks intuition. The world owes more than it is capable of repaying. Global debt, government, corporate, and private, exceeds $300 trillion. To grasp the scale of this number, imagine this. It is more than the entire global GDP for 3 years. More than the value of all goods and services that all of humanity, all 8 billion people, can produce over 3 years of continuous work. And this debt continues to grow. Every day, every hour, every second. While you're listening to these words, it has increased by several more million. But here is what is critically important to understand from the very beginning. This is not a mistake. It is not a miscalculation, not the result of poor management, not the consequence of politicians being unable to count or bankers being too greedy. The system is structured so that debt never disappears. It is designed this way. This is its architecture, its foundation, its reason for existence. If global debt could be repaid, the financial system would simply cease to exist. This is not an exaggeration, not a metaphor, not a rhetorical device to attract attention. It is a literal, technical, accounting truth. And to understand why, we need to understand what money actually is. Most people think of money as something that exists on its own, independently of everything else. There is money, paper bills in a wallet, coins in a pocket, numbers in a bank account, and there are debts that must be repaid with that money. Money and debt, in this picture of the world, are two different things, two different phenomena. One is good, the other is bad. You want more money and less debt. Logical, right? Intuitively clear? But that is not how it works. Not at all. In the modern financial system, money and debt are the same phenomenon, simply seen from different sides, recorded in different columns of the accounting ledger. Every dollar, every euro, every yuan, every pound that exists in the world is someone's liability, someone's IOU, someone's promise. Money is not printed out of thin air for no reason. It is created through debt. This is not a simplification, it is an exact description of the mechanism. When a bank gives you a loan, it does not go to a vault, open a safe, pull out stacks of banknotes and hand them to you. It creates money, literally out of nothing, by making an entry in a computer system. The loan amount appears in your account, say $100,000. And at that very same moment, through that same operation, your obligation to repay those $100,000 appears. Money and debt arise simultaneously, like Siamese twins, like two sides of the same coin, like the left and right sides of an accounting equation. This is called fractional reserve banking, and it is the foundation of the entire modern financial system worldwide. A bank can issue loans for significantly more money than it actually has in deposits. The Federal Reserve System can create money simply by buying government bonds, that is, government debt. The entire money supply, all these hundreds of trillions circulating in the global economy, is not wealth in the usual material sense. It is a gigantic network of obligations, a web of debts that people, companies, and governments owe each other. One party's asset is another party's liability. Your bank deposit is the bank's obligation to you. A banknote in your pocket is the obligation of the Federal Reserve. And here's the key thought that must truly be understood and internalized. If all debt were repaid, money itself would disappear. Not figuratively, not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech. Literally disappear. Because money is debt, just recorded in a different column. When you repay a loan to a bank, the money does not go somewhere else or pile up in a vault. It is destroyed. It ceases to exist, just as it was created out of nothing at the moment the loan was issued. Remove all obligations from the system, and no money will remain at all. How did we arrive at such a strange, counterintuitive system? It did not happen overnight. It was a long evolution, stretched over centuries. Once, money was tied to something physical, tangible, something you could touch and weigh. Gold or silver. Coins were minted from precious metals, and their value was determined by weight and purity. Such a system had its advantages. Stability, clarity, limits on the arbitrariness of rulers. But it also had a fundamental limitation, a limitation on growth. An economy under the gold standard could not grow faster than the extraction of precious metals. Want more money in circulation to finance more transactions, more enterprises, more trade? Mine more gold. But the amount of gold on the planet is limited. It lies deep underground, and its extraction is expensive, complex, and slow. You cannot simply print gold when you need it. For an economy that wants to grow, expand, and develop, this is a serious problem. For governments that want to spend more than they collect in taxes, that want to wage wars, build empires, buy the loyalty of the population, it is an outright catastrophe. And so, gradually, step by step, sometimes imperceptibly, sometimes through crises, the link between money and gold was weakened. First came credit in the modern sense, not the gold itself, but a promise to pay gold in the future. Credit allowed the economy to grow faster than the physical supply of metal permitted. Then came paper money, formally backed by gold, well, not gold itself, but a piece of paper promising a redemption in gold on demand. Then that backing became increasingly conditional, increasingly nominal, increasingly detached from reality. And then came 1971. On August 15th, President Nixon delivered a televised address to the nation and announced that the United States would stop exchanging dollars for gold. This was presented as a temporary measure, as a technical adjustment caused by special circumstances. In reality, it was the moment when the ceiling was removed completely and irreversibly. From that Sunday evening, money ceased to be tied to anything physical, tangible, or limited. It became a pure obligation, a pure promise, pure trust, a pure computer entry. And debt became theoretically infinite, not in the sense that it can accumulate endlessly without consequences, but in the sense that all formal external constraints on its growth disappeared. Now, let us address the central question: why in such a system does debt not merely grow, but must grow constantly, continuously, without stopping? This is not the greed of individual Wall Street bankers, not the stupidity of individual politicians in Washington, not the result of some secret elite conspiracy. It is the pure mathematics of the system, its internal, relentless logic. The modern economy requires growth. This is not a whim, not an ideology, not someone's desire. It is a structural necessity. Without economic growth, it is impossible to service existing debt, to pay interest and repay principal. Without growth, it is impossible to maintain the living standards of a growing population, to create jobs for the young. Without growth, it is impossible to finance Social Security and Medicare for an aging population, education, infrastructure, and defense. Politicians who allow economic decline lose elections. Companies that do not grow lose investors and fall in value. Growth is the oxygen of the modern economy. Without it, it suffocates. But growth requires investment. To build a new factory, money is needed now, today, while profits will come later, years down the line. To develop a new product, funding is needed for research that will pay off only in the future, and not guaranteed. To expand a business, hire people, buy equipment, capital is required. Where does this capital for investment come from? From credit? From debt? Economic growth is impossible without the expansion of credit, without the creation of new debt. And here is where a trap appears, one that has no exit within the existing system. Credit is issued with interest. This is the basic condition on which the entire banking system operates. This means that you must return more than you borrowed. You borrowed 100,000, you must return 110,000 or 120,000, depending on the interest rate. Where do those additional 10,000 or 20,000 come from to pay the interest? They must come from economic growth financed by that credit. The loan is taken, a business is built, the business produces goods or services, they are sold at a profit, and from that profit, the loan with interest is repaid. A neat scheme. But what if growth is insufficient? What if profits are not enough to cover the interest? What if the economy does not grow as planned? Then a new loan is required to service the old one, borrowing in order to pay previous debts. Old debt is literally paid with new debt. This is not an abuse of the system, not a distortion of it, not some mistake. This is the system. This is how it works. This is how it is designed. Imagine a cyclist riding on a thin rope over an abyss. He must keep pedaling in order not to fall. He cannot stop. He will fall. He cannot slow down. He will lose balance. Only faster and faster, only forward. The modern financial system is such a bicycle. It cannot stop. It cannot slow down. It can only accelerate. Slowing down means that new debt no longer covers the servicing of old debt. This means defaults, bankruptcies, a crisis of trust, collapse. The system demands constant acceleration, constant growth of debt, constant expansion. The system cannot stop. It can only accelerate. Now a question that completely changes the perception of the situation. Who actually owes these hundreds of trillions of global debt? Formally, on paper, governments, corporations, and households owe it. Every debt has a legal debtor, a signature on a contract, an obligation, but this is a facade, a bookkeeping convention, a legal fiction. The federal government is not some separate being with its own money falling from the sky. The government is us, the taxpayers. When the Treasury issues bonds and borrows money, it pledges future tax revenues. Whose taxes? Ours. And the taxes of our children. And the taxes of our grandchildren who have not yet been born. The real debtor of global debt is the future. Generations that have not yet come into the world, that did not vote for these expenditures, did not choose these priorities, did not consent to these obligations. They will arrive in a world where the bill has already been issued, where their future labor has already been pledged and promised to creditors, where their opportunities are already constrained by decisions made before their birth by people they will never meet. This is not abstract philosophy. This is concrete demography. Look at America and other developed countries. The population is aging. Baby boomers are retiring. The number of workers is shrinking. The number of retirees is growing. Social Security was created in an era when more than 40 workers supported one retiree. Today, that ratio is less than 3 to 1, and soon it will be 2 to 1. The promises made to older generations, pensions, healthcare, social benefits, are mathematically impossible to fulfill through contributions and taxes from workers alone. The gap is covered by debt, government debt that will fall on the shoulders of millennials, Generation Z, and those not yet born. And this brings us to the main technical question. Why is global debt impossible to repay? Not in a philosophical sense, not a moral one, not a political one, but in a purely technical, mechanical, accounting sense. The first reason is interest. Debt is issued with interest. This is the foundation of banking. To repay debt with interest, there must be more money in the economy than existed initially. You borrow 100, you must repay 110. Where do the additional 10 come from? Only from new debt. Someone else must borrow so that money appears in the economy to pay your interest. It is mathematically impossible to repay all debt with interest if new debt is not constantly created. The system requires a continuous inflow of new debt to service old debt. This is not a bug, not a programmer's mistake. It is the design, the architecture of the system. The second reason is the deflationary spiral. Suppose the impossible happens. All people, all companies, all governments decide to repay their debts at the same time. What happens? Money begins to disappear from the economy. Remember, money is created through debt, and when debt is repaid, money is destroyed. Mass debt repayment means a sharp contraction of the money supply. A contraction of the money supply means falling prices, falling wages, falling demand for goods and services. In an economy where prices are falling, no one wants to spend money today. Why buy now if the same thing will be cheaper tomorrow? Consumers postpone purchases, businesses postpone investments. Demand falls even further. Companies cut production and lay off workers. Unemployment rises, incomes fall, people cut spending even more. The spiral tightens, the economy contracts, and crucially, debts become heavier relative to falling incomes. You still owe the same amount, but your income has collapsed. The debt burden doubles. This is the deflationary spiral, the very mechanism that turned the stock market crash of 1929 into the Great Depression. The third reason is that the banking system would not survive. Banks live on the spread between the interest they earn on loans and the interest they pay on deposits. Their assets are issued loans, the debts of other people and companies. If debts are massively repaid, banks might survive. But if debts are massively written off, if borrowers cannot pay and default, bank assets evaporate. The bank becomes insolvent, its obligations to depositors remain, but its assets are gone. Depositors realize this, panic, try to withdraw money, but the money is not there. It was loans that no longer exist. The bank collapses. Other banks exposed to it collapse as well. A domino effect. Panic spreads. We saw this in 2008 with Lehman Brothers, and that was only one bank, only one. This is why repaying global debt is technically impossible. Not because of a lack of political will or financial discipline, not because people are irresponsible or governments are corrupt, but because the very attempt to repay the debt would destroy the system that rests on that debt. Repaying the debt is not a solution. It is the destruction of the system. But debt cannot grow infinitely, right? At some point it becomes unbearable. At some point interest servicing consumes all income. At some point the ceiling is reached. What do states do then? History is an excellent teacher, and it shows that scenarios repeat with astonishing precision across centuries and millennia. The first tool is inflation, the softest, the least noticeable, the most politically convenient method. If you owe $1 million and prices in the economy have increased tenfold, then your debt in real terms has decreased tenfold. You still owe $1 million nominally, but that million now buys 10 times fewer goods. Inflation is a hidden tax on everyone who holds money in any form, and at the same time, a hidden debt write-off for everyone who owes. It is a redistribution from creditors to debtors, from savers to borrowers, from those living on fixed incomes to those who own real assets. The Federal Reserve officially targets 2% inflation, and this is no coincidence. Moderate inflation quietly, invisibly, without votes in Congress, without debates and protests, reduces the real burden of government debt year after year. The second tool is direct currency debasement, devaluation, monetary reform, confiscatory exchange of old money for new at an unfavorable rate. In Weimar Germany in 1923, old marks were exchanged for new Rentenmarks at a ratio of 1 trillion to 1. All debts denominated in old marks simply evaporated, became meaningless figures, along with all the savings of ordinary Germans. The middle class was destroyed within a few months. America has not gone through this yet. But the closure of the gold window in 1971 was itself a form of devaluation. The dollar lost its peg to gold and began to lose purchasing power. Since 1971, the dollar has lost more than 85% of its purchasing power. The third tool is direct redistribution through taxes and confiscations. Wealth taxes, inheritance taxes, taxes on unrealized gains, freezing of bank accounts, forced conversions. When debt can no longer be serviced by traditional means, the state begins to look for who still has money and takes it. This can be called different things: fair burden sharing, contribution of the wealthy to the common good, fighting inequality. But the mechanics are the same: forced seizure of assets from some to cover obligations to others. In 1933, Roosevelt confiscated gold from American citizens. This was precisely such a measure. All these tools have one thing in common: they shift costs from those who made spending decisions to those who had no voice in those decisions, from the present to the future, from the informed and prepared to the uninformed and caught off guard. So who benefits in a system of perpetual debt? Why does it persist if it creates such problems? Those closest to the source of money creation benefit. This is called the Cantillon effect, named after an 18th century French economist. When the Federal Reserve creates new money, it does not fall evenly from helicopters on all Americans. It goes first to specific people and institutions, to Wall Street banks that receive liquidity from the Federal Reserve, to large corporations that can borrow first and at the lowest interest rates, to hedge funds that have access to primary offerings. These first recipients spend the new money at old prices. Prices have not yet had time to rise. Then the money spreads through the economy, prices increase, and those at the end of the chain, ordinary workers on Main Street, receive the same money but already devalued, already surrounded by higher prices. Owners of real assets benefit: stocks, real estate, land, businesses. When the Federal Reserve prints trillions through quantitative easing, asset prices rise first and fastest. The stock market sets records, housing prices rise, but wages do not keep up. Those who understand the rules of the game benefit. Most Americans save money in savings accounts at 2%, and inflation at 3 to 4% year after year quietly and visibly eats away their purchasing power. A minority converts money into assets, uses debt as a tool, as leverage for acquiring assets. And here's the central question that is rarely spoken aloud: what if perpetual debt is not a problem to be solved, not a disease to be cured, but the foundation on which everything is deliberately built? What if this is not a bug, but a feature, as they say in Silicon Valley? Debt is a tool for managing behavior. A person in debt is a predictable person. He does not quit, does not take risks, does not cause problems. He goes to work every day, pays his bills, fears losing his source of income. A 30-year mortgage is 30 years of disciplined, predictable behavior. Student debt of $50,000 is years of work in positions a person would not freely choose. A country in debt to international creditors is a country that complies, follows conditions, implements recommended reforms. Debt is a way to shift costs through time. Want wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but do not want to raise taxes and anger voters? Borrow, let future generations pay. Want stimulus checks before elections, but do not want to cut other spending? Borrow. Debt allows consumption today to be paid for tomorrow by other people. Politically, it is incredibly convenient. Perpetual debt is not a bug of the system. It is its foundation, its load-bearing structure. The system works not despite debt, but because of it. But if debt cannot be repaid and cannot be accumulated infinitely either, something has to happen, right? History gives a clear answer: reset. Debt is not repaid, it is written off. Through hyperinflation, through sovereign defaults, through monetary reforms, through wars and changes of political systems. Each time the circumstances are different, the names are different, the technologies are different, but the result is the same. Accumulated obligations become impossible to fulfill and are wiped out one way or another. The question is not whether we will repay global debt. No, we will not. That is mathematically impossible and not praetus motorna by the system. The question is how it will be written off, smoothly or abruptly, in an orderly or chaotic way, and most importantly, at whose expense? Who will pay the bills that cannot be honestly paid? Holders of treasury bonds or owners of real estate? Retirees relying on Social Security or banks that financed all these promises? Those who understood the rules of the game and prepared? Or those who believed the system was eternal and fair? The history of debt never ends with a neat payment of the final installment. It always ends with a reset.